So I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Kennedy.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any, no, actually, I can start with one. What would you have, I guess, suggestions for if you're thinking at a university level or departmental level, trying to kind of make the case for getting, more mixed methods software? I know you had mentioned it that you don't always need a course, and I know that was something that came up at the qualitative session, because you had mentioned it earlier in your presentation that still quantitative is kind of looked at as king. And so, do you have kind of thoughts or suggestions on trying to make those cases for your deduces or your outlook, like those types of softwares?
I think there are, as I understand it, I remember at Tech, when I was working at Virginia Tech, the institution had licenses to the software. And so you could, in our case, it was QSR in vivo, which is the one I've used the most, but they're all similar in some ways. And so the institution had licenses already, but I guess the trick is to convince your institution to buy a license so that you can use it for free. They do have student versions or trial versions, but they're misleading because they don't have as much of the bells and whistles. And so you don't really get a sense of all that it can do. It's part of the case would be it's a platform for collaboration. They're mostly developed, they've developed now so that you could go online and look at the data and code it, and then Andrew could go online and he could code it. So you can be working on the databases together. So really, I guess my key argument would be that it twofold. Facilitates collaboration, but it really facilitates advanced reasoning, which I mean, not simply descriptive, but theoretical. I said, it's my experience that once you get above a certain amount of data, Post-it notes and Excel just can't, it's just, you can't manage it. It's not manageable. So if you think of an hour interview produces a 20-page transcript, you can imagine that if you do 20 or 30 interviews, you got a ton of data. So it is really for, you probably dealt with this at Clemson. I mean, this really facilitates research.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Christine, I see your comment. Do you want to say a little bit more about that, the Mechanical Turk issues?
Oh, yeah, I kind of do a lot of research on the sort of the business side, the worker side of things, and rather than, student behavior. And so there's been some real controversy about bots, for example, coming into MTurk and creating basically false data. So there are quality control issues sometimes that I know Amazon is working on, of course. But the other thing that we have found is that there are certain types of things that crowdsourcing works really well for, and certain other, like site constructs, are relatively easy and work well. But some of the other things, like if you're venturing into a new area where maybe the general public or people who would be participating, they're not familiar with a construct you're using, you're kind of stuck and you might not get very good data. It's just this certain loss of control. It sounds like it's a great idea to get lots of people, but you also don't necessarily have enough data about who you're getting and the quality of the data. But it's a very cool, a lot of people in business have been using it. And the American Journal of Sociology, I'm going to say maybe 4 years ago, did a nice little summary of the pros and cons of it. But I think crowdsourcing is something that we're going to see more of in the future, because it's just, it's the opportunity that I think we've all been looking for a long time to get a more diverse set of databases. So yeah, I like
That's
that
helpful.
with this, because I've seen people use MTurk in mixed methods research very successfully in the business world.
Good. Uh-huh. The that's helpful. You know more about it than I do, because as I said, I just heard about it this week. The software, the qualitative software also now has features that those of you who are so technology oriented could use. Automatic transcription, for instance. It's not perfect, but the days of needing to transcribe interviews is past. It also has some auto coding features that you can, it's the, you know, type machine language where you can, now I'm not a big fan of this, but you can begin to try to teach it to code. It works the best if everyone is using the same language. So if you're in a topic area, maybe this would be in business or something, when people use this word, they pretty much are using the same word, the same language. Maybe a medical setting would be an example. So they're mapping things in the qualitative software. They can, where you can see which words are being used most frequently. And this is a resource, and I'm not saying stop there as your analysis. It's just like a window into things you might want to explore. So it can create like its own social network map of the words and phrases that your participants are using a lot. And then you can use that to sort of go in and explore that. So it's not an endpoint, it's just a tool to decide what it is you are going to emphasize.
I've got a question. So thanks very much for your talk. This is very much an introduction to mixed methods research for me. So I appreciate that. And you had mentioned that there was a lot of interesting work using mixed methods in kind of GIS spaces. And I'm just curious to know if you could talk more about that, like what that might look like.
So let me tell you where you would find that research first, and then I'll tell you how it's used. There's a new Routledge Reviewer's Handbook that came out by Amaguzzi and Johnson that has a chapter on GIS. They tend to be in the handbooks. So there's some handbooks of mixed methods research that have whole chapters on GIS. Where geographic information systems. So let me think about, you can probably describe it almost better than I can, but let me see if I have seen it paired. Let me give you an example of where it was paired. So in a study by Texiera, mixed methods study by Texiera, which is not a perfect study, but it was her dissertation. She was in an urban environment and she had geolocators for areas in the urban environment that had a high crime rate. And then she used qualitative methods, actually walk around, what they call walk around data collection, where she had people walking around these neighborhoods and pointing out the features of these neighborhoods that kind of explain the high crime rate. So the geo-positioning was also used in a study about campus safety, trying to pinpoint the differences between students' idea, this was a college campus, I think it might have been UVA. And it was like, students think these are the dangerous areas, but they had the GIS coordinates about what were the dangerous areas. And so they used it to teach students about what to look for. So it was sort of an interactive. Do you know of any more, Andrew? Those are two I know well.
No, I don't. And thanks for the kind of explaining those examples a little bit more. It helps me kind of get an even better understanding of the potential applications here. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of research in geography done with GIS, you can imagine, where they're studying human interaction in different cultural settings. So a lot of GIS stuff there. Yeah, for those interested in social network analysis, which I showed you the picture of, Dominic Freilich has just published a book about using mixed methods with social network analysis. He's from Vienna, Froelich, and he's an up-and-coming young scholar. There's someone at the University of Cincinnati doing a lot of work with social network analysis too. I think part of what's happening is the technology is creating more and more opportunities to integrate in these meaningful ways. It's inviting, integration because of the way it allows you to visualize data, I guess I'd say. Love that question.
I wonder if you could build on something you said during the presentation, which intrigued me because it's one of these things that with my own students, I find most problematic, is this, this belief that frequency somehow has like this amazing, impactful meaning, and the tendency to latch on to frequency data as sort of the essence of qualitative research, and to sort of what I'm curious about what you do to dissuade students from focusing so much on frequency as some sort of meaningful and measurable. I always think of it as quantifying qualitative research rather
It
than
is.
true
Yeah.
qualitative research.
Yeah. I think that's when you sort of get into the idea of the criticism of mixed up methods. So it's sort of like you apply a quantitative logic to qualitative data, or a qualitative logic to quantitative data, as if they're not their own distinct logics. So I think that gets sort of the criticism that you're mixing apples and oranges. But I think the same logic extends to thinking that you have mixed data because you have race, ethnicity, and gender data, and you can sort data on race, ethnicity, and gender as if that alone is going to provide much particular insight. But I do think it's just super wise to just say, maybe frequency is certainly it plays a role. Sandal, Wesky, Marguerite would say that it plays a role. Okay, so it's important, the themes occur at some regularity, or there's some pattern, but it's hardly an endpoint. It's a sign, but I think you're really wise to be cautious about that, because counting qual themes and putting it in a table does not make it mixed methods. It probably doesn't make it qual.
Right. Yeah.
If you're applying a quant, you're just counting everything, then you're kind of living in quant land, I think.
Yeah, it's such a black box. You don't know what it actually means, that if everyone says something, they've talked it into existence, but what does that really mean? without really digging into that, but I think especially in education, I've seen so many publications that focus on frequency as this meaningful thing. And it's almost to, and I think it's probably because we all tend to be very quantitative in our orientations to begin with in our training. And so it's sort of hard to get out of that mindset. But I think your point is really well taken.
I think the same is true with machine learning. So you're probably better educated on this than I am, but I mentioned that how in the qualitative software, it'll draw you maps of the words that are in the phrases that are used most frequently. And that's can be a good starting place. You know, it can lead you. But, you know, the problem with machine learning, and hopefully you all know what that is. It's like you create a dictionary and it codes for you. It's so dependent on frequency that kind of really doesn't fully fulfill my idea of what qualitative research is. And it's ironic because I mentioned that historically mixed methods is more likely to be quantitative priority than qualitative priority. So there's been a greater tendency to trivialize the qual than there has been to trivialize the quant. And again, in the machine learning, I think it's applying quantity as the primary analytical strategy, which is not, I don't think, what qual is really about.
This is great. I want to say one thing.
Go right ahead.
I'm so excited, you know, to have that we're having this conversation at Peabody and building, you know, some connections with qualitative researchers in there. So hi, everyone. But one of the things that just to sort of give us some hope. So I literally came out, my PhD is in business. So I literally came over from the business field. And a few years ago in our empirical journal, the editors did a poll of the editorial board members to just ask them without any agenda, what were the most impactful studies that had been done in the last 50 years. And the overwhelming majority were the qualitative papers, qualitative or mixed methods. So I think this is where impact comes. So it's very, very cool stuff what you're doing.
Well, and there's some evidence, I can't remember the source, but that mixed methods articles are cited more highly. This ties a little bit to what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's partly because they're interdisciplinary and they're crossing methods so that it has a broader appeal maybe than empirical articles that are so content focused that they may only be reaching 10 or 15, you know, a circle of 10 or 15, 20 people that are just fascinated with that construct or phenomena. So I think that may be the reason that that the evidence suggests that they're cited more frequently.